They whispered her fate before the sun even touched the horizon, as though the morning light itself might change their minds if they waited. The wind carried rumors through the dusty main street of Dry Creek. By sunset, she would hang. Some spoke her name with fear, others with disgust, and a few said nothing at all, but every tongue spoke of her. The Apache girl. The savage. The prisoner who would swing. The wooden platform had been built in a hurry. Rough-hewn planks stood at the center of the town square like a monument to judgment. Its beams still smelled of fresh-cut pine, and the noose, thick and unforgiving, swayed gently with each breath of wind. Horses tied to railings snorted nervously. Shopkeepers stood at their doorways, squinting into the morning glare as they whispered to one another. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, curious eyes wide with questions no one dared answer. The woman stood quietly at the base of the gallows, wrists bound in heavy iron cuffs. Dust clung to her bare feet. Her hair, long and black as raven wings, fell loosely around her shoulders, tangled but defiant. Her dress, if it could be called that, was little more than a torn piece of linen given to her when they stripped her of her buckskin clothing. Yet she stood taller than any of them, with a straight spine and a gaze that did not bend. Her name was Ayanna. Her dark eyes scanned the faces surrounding her, but she did not tremble, even when a stone thrown by some boy too brave for his size struck her shoulder. She did not cry. She did not beg. If anything, her silence frightened them more than any curse could have. "Savage witch," muttered an older woman near the blacksmith shop. "She murdered our cattle," said a man near the saloon, though he hadn't seen it himself. "I heard she slit a rancher's throat," another added, though he had no proof. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with a gray mustache and a conscience buried deep beneath the weight of responsibility, stood near her with his rifle tucked under one arm. His name was Marshal Avery. He wasn't cruel, but justice in Dry Creek was often louder than truth, and louder still was fear. "Bring her up," he ordered two deputies. They took her by the arms, rougher than they needed to be. Ayanna did not resist. She walked up the steps of the gallows with dignity, her footsteps soft against the wooden planks. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting light on her face. For a moment it almost looked like a crown. The crowd shifted and murmured as the sheriff raised his hand for silence. The murmurs fell away like fading footsteps. "You all know why we're here," he began, his voice roughened by years of shouting across prairie winds and gunfire. "This woman is accused of trespassing, theft, and the killing of livestock. Some claim worse." He paused. "The council has spoken. She is to hang by sundown." Ayanna didn't lower her gaze, her lips pressed together, unreadable. From the crowd someone shouted, "Hang her now." "Don't wait!" Another added, "She'll bring a war from her people." Marshal Avery's jaw tightened. "We follow the law in this town, sundown, not before. It should have ended there." The crowd should have dispersed, gone about their business until it was time to return for the spectacle. But fate had other plans. A low rumble echoed down the long dirt road leading into town. Hoofbeats, steady, fast. A horse broke through the morning mist, kicking up clouds of dust that shimmered in the golden light. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The rider, tall and lean, sat straight in the saddle. His coat was worn from years of sun and travel, stained by rain and blood and dust. His hat sat low over his eyes, shadowing his face. A rifle hung from his saddle. His horse, a dark chestnut mare, snorted and slowed only when he pulled sharply on the reins. Stopping a few feet from the gallows, the town fell silent. The man's voice cut through the stillness, strong and clear. "You're hanging an innocent woman," several people gasped. The sheriff stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man swung off his horse, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. He met the sheriff's eyes without hesitation. "Name's Daniel Hart." The name spread through the crowd like wildfire. Some recognized it. Some only pretended to. Daniel Hart was a man who lived between the lines of legend and reality. Whispers of a rancher who kept to himself. A gunman who fought when he had to. A man who had no home but the western wind. Marshal Avery narrowed his eyes. "This isn't your concern, Hart." "It is now," Daniel said, calm but unyielding. He glanced toward Ayanna, his jaw set. "You've condemned the wrong person." The crowd rippled with unease. Some turned to each other, whispering. Others stared at Daniel with a mix of hope and suspicion. The sheriff stepped closer, his boots creaking against the boards. "She's Apache. Her people have raided our herds. They've burned our homes. You're asking us to forget that? Daniel's voice didn't waver. I'm asking you to judge her, not her blood. Ayana's eyes widened, though just a little. Surprise, maybe. Or disbelief. No one had spoken for her since she was taken. Daniel continued, louder now so all could hear. Her name is Ayana. Daughter of Chief Redhawk, she saved my life. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The sheriff stiffened. Explain. Daniel took a breath, the kind a man takes before he tears open an old wound. 3 weeks ago, I was riding the North Pass near Willow Creek. Got ambushed by bandits. They took my horse, my supplies, shot me in the shoulder, left me to rot in the dirt. Ayana looked at him, her expression unreadable. I don't remember much after that, Daniel said. Just the sound of water, and a voice, gentle. She found me by the riverbank. Stopped the bleeding. Stayed until I could walk. She could have left me there. Could have taken my gun and gone. But she didn't. He looked at the sheriff. I owe her my life. The sheriff's jaw clenched. His eyes flickered to Ayana, then back to Daniel. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the charges. Then prove them, Daniel replied. Show me the cattle she killed. The bloodied knife. The body of the rancher she's supposed to have murdered. Show me anything but hearsay. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried the kind of weight that settled in a man's bones. The crowd stared at the sheriff now, some nodding, some frowning. Doubt seeped into the air like smoke. Ayana, still silent, felt her heartbeat slow. She had expected pain, humiliation, death. She had not expected this man, this stranger she once saved, to stand before her like a shield. A voice came from the back of the crowd. Even if she saved you, she's still Apache. Their kind, Daniel spun, eyes blazing. Their kind? She risked her life for me when your kind rode past and pretended not to see. The man fell silent. Marshal Avery exhaled, his hand hovering near his holster, not to draw but out of habit. Hart, you're treading dangerous ground. Daniel's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. I've walked on worse. Ayana studied him, trying to understand why he would risk himself. She had not expected to see him again. When she found him at the river, feverish and wounded, she thought he would die by morning. But she cleaned his wound. She brought him water. She sang the songs her mother used to sing when someone in the tribe was close to death. And when the sun rose and he still breathed, she left him, believing their stories had ended there. Yet here he was. Marshal Avery turned toward the gallows, where the noose hung innocently. What do you want, Hart? Daniel looked at Ayana, then at the crowd. I want you to give her a fair chance. Let her speak. Let me speak. And if after that you still think she deserves to hang, I won't stand in your way. The sheriff hesitated. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Some folded their arms. A few walked away, muttering curses under their breath. Finally, Marshal Avery gave a slow nod. You have until sundown. After that, this town makes its decision. Daniel tipped his hat. That's all I ask. The sheriff motioned to his deputies. Take her back to the cell. And keep it quiet. No one touches her. As the deputies moved to escort Ayana, Daniel stepped closer. For the first time, their eyes met fully. She spoke at last, voice soft but steady. Why? Daniel answered. Because you didn't let me die. She did not smile, but something softened in her eyes like the first breath of spring after winter. The deputies led Ayana away, and the crowd slowly dispersed, less certain than they had been at dawn. People retreated to their shops and porches, but their thoughts stayed on the gallows, on the stranger who stood against an entire town, on the woman whose fate now hung by more than a rope. It hung by truth. The sun climbed higher, scorching the earth. Time moved, but the weight of that moment lingered like a shadow over Dry Creek. By sundown, everything would change. Daniel stood in the sheriff's office, hat in his hand, dust still clinging to the edges of his coat. The air inside was heavy with silence and tobacco smoke. Ayana sat on the wooden bench along the wall, her wrists no longer bound but her freedom still an illusion. The cells were just behind her, iron bars, a narrow cot, and a bucket in the corner. She did not speak, but she watched everything. Marshal Avery leaned against his desk, arms crossed as if anchoring himself to a choice he wasn't ready to own. His voice was quieter now, no longer meant for the crowd outside. You've bought her time, Hart, nothing more. Daniel nodded. Time's all I asked for. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Make the most of it. You've got until sundown to convince me and the council she doesn't deserve the rope. But if you're wrong, I won't be, Daniel interrupted. His voice was calm but solid as a stone in a river. Ayanna looked from one man to the other. She did not understand why this stranger, this rancher she had helped only once, would return. Her people often said the white man's gratitude was like winter grass, gone at the first wind. Yet here he stood. The sheriff motioned to Deputy Collins, a younger man with sandy hair and a nervous habit of tapping his boot heel. Watch her. Don't let trouble near her cell. Collins nodded and stood guard near the doorway. Daniel turned slightly toward Ayanna, his voice softer. They'll listen if we give them truth. Ayanna hesitated, then replied in English, rough but clear. Truth doesn't change their hearts. Daniel's gaze held hers. Sometimes it does. Marshal Avery pushed away from the desk, grabbing his hat. Council meets in an hour. You'll speak then, both of you. Don't waste my time. He left, boots echoing on the wooden floorboards, leaving behind an air of decisions yet to be made. Outside, the town simmered with restlessness. Some people returned to their daily work, mending fences, tending horses, but their minds stayed near the gallows. Others lingered in the streets, whispering Daniel Hart's name as though it were both a promise and a problem. Daniel pulled up a chair near Ayanna. He didn't sit too close. She noticed that. He gave her space. Respect. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, he said. I can tell them what happened. Ayanna tilted her head, eyes unreadable. Your words may save yourself. They won't save me. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to save myself. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken things. Ayanna studied his face. The worn lines around his eyes, the small scar on his jaw, the weariness of a man who had seen too much of death and not enough of mercy. Why did you come back? She finally whispered, Daniel's hands folded loosely in his lap. He looked down at them, then back at her. Because you didn't leave me in the dirt. Because if I rode away and forgot you, I wouldn't be any better than the men who left me there. Her gaze softened, but only slightly. You could die for this. Daniel shrugged, a quiet smile ghosting across his lips. Maybe, but I've come close before. Deputy Collins shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Sheriff said to get you to the hall soon. Daniel stood. We'll be ready. Ayanna rose slowly, the chains around her ankles clinking softly. Daniel noticed how thin she looked, how bruises marked her wrists from the iron cuffs. His jaw tightened. As they stepped outside, the midday sun beat down, casting long shadows. People stopped what they were doing to stare. Some glared. Others watched with uneasy curiosity. A few, just a few, lowered their eyes in shame. They walked to the town hall, a wooden building near the center of Dry Creek. Inside, the council sat around a long table. Sheriff Avery, Pastor Wilkes, Mayor Thompson, and Mrs. Calloway, who ran the general store and was known for her sharp tongue and sharper eyes. Daniel and Ayanna stood before them. Mayor Thompson, a balding man with a round face, cleared his throat. Hart, you asked for this hearing. Speak. Daniel nodded. Thank you. He began to tell the story, how he was ambushed, left bleeding in the dirt, how Ayanna found him, saved him. His voice didn't waver. He told it plain and clear, without embellishment, like a man who's seen too much of truth to bother with lies. Sheriff Avery listened, arms folded tightly. Pastor Wilkes frowned thoughtfully. Mrs. Calloway tapped her fingers on the table. Then Daniel said, You want justice? Fine. But justice isn't a noose made from fear. Mrs. Calloway raised an eyebrow. Pretty words, Mr. Hart, but people here have lost cattle. Some lost family. How do we know she wasn't part of it? Daniel looked to Ayanna. Ask her. The room grew still. Ayanna stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but strong. I do not kill cattle for sport. I do not burn homes. My people take only what we need. We fight when we must. Pastor Wilkes leaned forward. And did you cross into Dry Creek land? Ayanna met his eyes. To find herbs for medicine. My brother was sick. I meant no harm. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. And the missing cattle? Ayanna shook her head. I do not know cattle. I know buffalo deer. I do not waste life. Daniel stepped in. You've accused her without proof. No bodies, no tracks. Just fear. Sheriff Avery sighed. What about the man from Red Willow? Said she threatened him. Ayanna's hands clenched. He tried to take me. I stopped him. Mrs. Calloway looked to the sheriff. She's dangerous. Daniel shook his head. She defended herself. Wouldn't you? The council exchanged glances. Doubt flickered across a few faces. Finally, Mayor Thompson said, "We'll discuss. Come back before sundown." Daniel nodded and placed a gentle hand near Ayanna's back. Not touching, just guiding. They stepped outside again, the sun lower in the sky now, the shadows longer. They walked toward the livery where Daniel's horse waited. Ayanna hesitated. "They will still hang me." Daniel looked at her. "Not if I can help it." Ayanna's lips pressed together, a hint of frustration or fear. "Why risk yourself?" Daniel glanced toward the fading horizon. "Because some things are worth the risk." They spent the afternoon waiting. Daniel paced the length of the sheriff's porch while Ayanna sat on the step, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust. At one point, a little girl approached her, clutching a rag doll. Her mother gasped and pulled her back, but not before the child asked in a soft voice, "Are you scared?" Ayanna looked at the girl, then nodded once. "Yes." The child thought about it, then whispered, "Me too," before being hurried away. Daniel watched silently. As the sky turned orange and purple, the church bell rang once, signaling the council's decision. They walked back to the town square. Ayanna's chains were back on her wrists. Daniel walked beside her, unbound but burdened. The crowd gathered again, some faces eager, some tired, some uncertain. Marshal Avery climbed the gallows steps. His voice was rougher than before. "The council has reached a decision." Daniel's breath caught. Ayanna stood still. Sheriff Avery looked at Ayanna, then at the crowd. "The charges remain, but we'll hear final words before sentence is carried out." Daniel stepped forward. "Sheriff, But before he finished, a distant sound cut through the air. A sharp whistle. Then, a gunshot. It echoed through the square, scattering birds from rooftops. People screamed. Another shot. Wood splintered near the gallows. Daniel spun toward the source. At the edge of town, riding hard, came men on horses, 6 of them. Faces masked, rifles raised, the same men who left Daniel to die by the river. The sheriff cursed. "Everyone down." Chaos erupted. People ran. Horses reared. Dust filled the air. Daniel drew his revolver. Ayanna, still chained, moved behind the support post of the gallows. Another bullet struck the steps, sending splinters flying. The lead outlaw shouted, "Hand over the Apache girl, or we burn this town." Daniel's heart pounded. These men weren't here for justice. They were here to silence her and him. Sheriff Avery fired a warning shot. "You'll get nothing." The outlaw laughed. "Then you'll all die with her." Daniel moved closer to Ayanna. "Stay low." She looked at him, her eyes calm despite the chaos. "The fight has come for me." Daniel shook his head. "No, it came for us." The outlaws advanced, and the sun dipped lower, pulling the day toward its final breath. Gunfire cracked through the evening air like thunder splitting the sky. Dust spiraled across the ground where bullets struck, and frightened townsfolk ducked behind barrels, wagons, and doorframes. The setting sun bled across the sky, turning clouds into streaks of fire, casting long shadows over the town square where moments earlier, judgment, not war, had been expected. Daniel's revolver was already in his hand. He moved with precision, not with the recklessness of a gunslinger seeking glory, but with the focus of a man who had nothing left to lose but his word. Ayanna crouched low behind one of the heavy wooden beams of the gallows, her hands still chained but her spirit unbound. The sound of hooves thundered from the outskirts of town as the outlaw riders advanced. Rifles slung in one hand, dust rising beneath their horses like storm clouds. Marshal Avery, though startled, recovered quickly. He shouted over the clamor, "Get to cover! Protect the civilians!" His deputies scrambled, dragging panicked townspeople toward the safety of buildings. Pastor Wilkes ushered a group of terrified children inside the church, his hands trembling but steady enough to hold open the doors. Daniel fired the first shot, striking the hat clean off one outlaw's head. The rider ducked, cursing loudly before firing back. The bullet whistled past Daniel's arm, close enough for him to feel its heat. He didn't flinch. Ayanna watched him from her place beneath the gallows. There was no fear in his movements, only purpose. The sky above them rumbled with the quiet of dusk, yet the world beneath it roared with chaos. One of the outlaws shouted, "Hand over the Apache girl! Do it now or we burn every house here." Marshal Avery stood atop the gallows, his rifle aimed squarely at the outlaw who spoke. "You'll get her over my dead body!" The outlaw grinned beneath his bandana. "That can be arranged." Two of the bandits broke formation and rode toward the gallows. Daniel cursed under his breath and sprinted toward Ayanna. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing through his sleeve and skin. He stumbled but kept running. He reached her, breathing hard. "Hold still." She looked at him, calm even as death galloped toward them. "What are you doing?" His jaw clenched as he pulled a knife from his belt. "Setting things right." With a swift motion, he slashed the chain between her wrists. The metal snapped and the cuffs dropped away, clattering against the wood. Ayanna stared down at her freed hands as though seeing them for the first time. "No time," he said, grabbing the pistol from the dead deputy lying nearby. He placed it in her hands. "You know how to use it?" Her fingers curled around the handle with familiarity. "Yes," Daniel nodded once. "Then help me save this town." The thunder of hooves grew louder. Ayanna stepped from behind the gallows, pistol in hand. Marshal Avery looked down at her from the platform, eyes narrow, expression unreadable. Then he gave a small nod. The first outlaw charged in, aiming his rifle. Ayanna fired. The bullet struck his shoulder, sending him crashing from his horse. The animal bolted, riderless. Daniel and the sheriff stood side by side, guns blazing as the other bandits stormed forward. The townsfolk watched in stunned silence. Some hid, some prayed. Some, like blacksmith Tyler Briggs and schoolteacher Emma Clark, grabbed rifles from their homes and took positions on rooftops. Gunfire echoed in sharp, violent bursts. Windows shattered. Horses screamed. Men shouted. The once silent square was alive with terror and defiance. One outlaw dismounted and charged on foot, firing wildly. Daniel dodged behind a water trough, his revolver empty. He crouched, reloading with steady hands. Ayanna stepped in, firing a single clean shot that dropped the outlaw to his knees. He stared at her in disbelief before falling face first into the dust. "You saved my life," Daniel muttered. She didn't look at him. "Now we are even." But they weren't, they both knew it. What debt existed between them could not be measured in bullets or blood. A second wave of gunfire erupted from the rooftops. The townsfolk, who that morning had been ready to hang her, were now fighting alongside her. Not all, but enough. Enough to show that fear could bend and sometimes even break. Marshal Avery reloaded his rifle and shouted to his deputies, "Flank them on the left. Don't let them reach the saloon." Deputy Collins, pale but determined, nodded and ran toward the alleyways with two other men. Shots rang out behind the general store as more outlaws tried to circle around. Ayanna's chest heaved as she reloaded. Sweat trickled down her temple, mingling with dust. Her chain marks burned red against her skin, but she ignored the pain. Daniel fired again, his bullets precise. One outlaw fell from his horse. Another turned to flee, but a shot from the sheriff took him down. But it wasn't over. The leader of the outlaws, tall, broad-shouldered, with a black duster coat and cold eyes, rode forward slowly. He removed his bandana, revealing a long scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He stared directly at Daniel. "Didn't think you'd get up after last time," the man sneered. Daniel's eyes hardened. "Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come back," the man smirked. "We want the girl. She saw us. She helped you live. That makes her a problem." Daniel stepped in front of Ayanna. "Then your problem is with me." The leader raised his rifle. Ayanna stepped forward too, pistol aimed at his chest. Marshal Avery's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Drop your weapon." But the outlaw leader only smiled and fired. The shot missed Daniel by inches. Ayanna reacted instantly, pulling the trigger. Her shot hit the ground near the outlaw's horse, causing it to rear violently. The man lost control and tumbled from the saddle. Daniel didn't wait. He rushed forward. The outlaw scrambled for his rifle, but Daniel kicked it away and leveled his pistol at him. The two men stared at each other, the outlaw breathing hard, blood trickling from his forehead, Daniel steady as a stone. "Tell your men to stand down," Daniel said. The outlaw spat blood. "Go to hell." Daniel cocked the hammer. "You first." Before he could shoot, a hand touched his arm. "Ayanna." "Don't," she whispered. "Killing him won't end this." Daniel hesitated. His finger rested on the trigger. Then slowly he lowered the gun. Marshal Avery stepped forward and grabbed the outlaw's collar. "You're done." He turned to the remaining bandits, who were slowly dropping their weapons. "All of you, drop your guns or you'll join him in the ground." One by one, rifles clattered to the dirt. The air grew still. Dust floated through the last light of day like falling ash. The setting sun cast a golden haze over the town, a town that now stood in silence, stunned by what had unfolded. Ayanna lowered her pistol. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, but her relief was cautious, uneasy. Daniel looked at her, chest rising and falling, a mixture of exhaustion and something deeper in his eyes, something like pride, or gratitude, or both. Around them, the townsfolk emerged from their hiding places. Some stared at Ayanna with disbelief, others with guilt, a few with respect. Sheriff Avery looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "The gallows won't have you today." She searched his face, trying to understand. "Then what will you do with me?" The sheriff sheathed his pistol. "We'll talk about that when the dead are buried." Daniel glanced toward the horizon where the last sliver of sun dipped behind the hills. "You did good," he said softly. Ayanna didn't smile. But her voice when she spoke carried something new, something fragile but real. "So did you." As the sky turned from gold to blue tonight, lanterns began to glow across the town. The noose still hung from the gallows, swaying slightly in the breeze, a reminder of how close death had come. But for the first time since dawn, it did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a crossroads, and the night, quiet, deep, uncertain, waited for the choice that would come next. The night was unnaturally still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The embers of the dying campfire flickered softly, casting wavering shadows across the silent clearing. Ayanna sat wrapped in a blanket, staring into the orange glow, her eyes distant yet calm, as though she had already accepted whatever fate the dawn would bring. Daniel sat across from her, sharpening his knife by habit more than need, though the steady scrape of metal against stone betrayed his silent anxiety. He glanced at her, noticing how the soft firelight touched her face. Strong, resolute, but with an unspoken sorrow there. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. She didn't look away from the flames. "And waste the last hours of peace we might ever have?" She replied, her voice soft but unwavering. "No, I'd rather stay awake and remember this." Daniel stopped sharpening. "You talk as if we've already lost." His voice carried a suppressed frustration, not at her, but at the world that kept pushing them into corners with no mercy. Ayanna finally turned to meet his eyes. Her voice trembled only slightly. "Sometimes even when you stand and fight, the world doesn't care." She unfolded her blanket and stood, approaching him slowly. "But that doesn't mean I'm afraid." "Not anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. He set the knife aside and rose to his feet. "I made you a promise. I intend to keep it. No one is taking you, not while I'm still breathing." She looked at him, eyes softening. "And if it costs you everything?" Without hesitation, he answered, "Then everything is a price I'm willing to pay." Ayanna stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of tears she hadn't allowed to fall. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk your life for me?" "Because," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "you're not a crime to defend. You're someone worth fighting for." Her breath caught. For a long, quiet moment, neither of them spoke. The world felt smaller, as though it consisted only of the space between them. Then she looked away, blinking back tears. "Get some rest," she said softly. We faced them at dawn, but Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat awake in the cold, fingers curled around the wooden handle of his rifle, eyes fixed on the horizon that would soon bleed with sunrise. By the time the first pale light crept over the hills, his horse was saddled. Ayanna stood beside her own horse, hair braided, chin held high. She mounted without a word, though her eyes lingered on Daniel a moment longer than necessary. The journey back to town was quiet. Frost still clung to the dry brush and fence rails. A faint mist drifted across the ground like ghosts reluctant to rise with the sun. The town lay ahead, still, silent, unaware of what was coming. But as they rode closer, movement stirred. People began to gather in the streets, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. Sheriff Colt stood outside the small jailhouse, hands resting on his gun belt. "So you came back," the sheriff said, expression unreadable. Daniel dismounted. "I said we'd be back by sunrise." Ayanna stood beside him, her face calm, though her heart thundered in her chest. The sheriff's gaze lingered on her, but something in his eyes had changed. Not hatred, but a wearied uncertainty. Daniel's voice was clear. "No one is taking her to the gallows. Not today. Not ever. The murmurs grew louder. People leaned from porches and windows. Colonel Briggs, harsh as sun-scorched granite, stepped forward. You don't decide the law, Daniel. No, Daniel said steadily. But I decide what I'll stand for. And I won't stand by while you murder an innocent woman. Apache or not, another voice called from the crowd. She spared that child. Sheriff said so himself. Ayanna's eyes widened in surprise. It was Mrs. Fletcher, the same woman who had once refused to let Ayanna near her well. The sheriff said nothing, his jaw tight but eyes contemplative. Briggs scoffed. You're all letting sentiment cloud judgment. Daniel stepped forward. Judgment? You call it justice to hang a woman whose only crime was being born different? A hush fell. For the first time, the colonel looked uncertain. The sheriff exhaled a long, tired breath. Daniel, what do you want? Freedom, he said simply. Her life. Her dignity. The chance for her people to be heard, not hunted. The sheriff glanced around at the townsfolk, their unsure faces, their wide eyes. He stepped aside. The charges are dropped. Shock rippled through the crowd. Briggs's face darkened with fury, but he didn't draw his weapon. Not with Daniel's rifle trained so close. Ayanna's breath trembled. She turned to Daniel, disbelief and relief colliding in her chest. He nodded, his voice low. It's over. But it wasn't, not entirely. Briggs strode forward, his voice a low growl. You think this ends because he says so? You think the world changes because one man makes a speech? His eyes burned. They'll never stop. Not for her. Not for any of them. Daniel held his stare. Then let them try. The colonel's lips curled. He turned sharply and walked away. The tension broke like a string snapping. People began to disperse, slowly at first, then faster. Life resuming its rhythm, though shadows of doubt remained. Daniel turned to Ayanna. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you away from here. They rode out of town to the open plains where the land stretched in golden silence. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the weight on Ayanna's chest began to lift. She glanced at Daniel, her voice quiet. You kept your promise, he smiled faintly. I intend to keep making new ones. They stopped by a wide river, the same river where she had nearly died weeks ago. The water shimmered beneath the sunlight, soft and inviting. Ayanna dismounted, her boots crunching on the riverbank. I used to fear this place, she confessed. Not the water itself, but what it took from me. My home. My people, everything. Daniel stood beside her. Maybe it can give something back too. She looked at him, really looked. His eyes were tired but gentle. His face roughened by wind and worry, yet softened by something she couldn't name. What will you do now? She asked. I don't know, he admitted. But wherever I go, I don't want to go alone. Her heartbeat stilled, then quickened. She stepped closer, the river breeze lifting strands of her dark hair. Are you asking me to stay? He hesitated, then whispered. I'm asking you to choose, not because you owe me, but because I... His voice faltered, softer now. I don't want a life where you're not there. Silence hung between them, broken only by the soft murmur of the river. Ayanna's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming reality of freedom. Of choice, she reached out, her fingers brushing his. Then I choose to stay. His breath caught. Slowly, carefully, his hand closed around hers. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The warmth of her touch, the quiet certainty in her voice, said more than words ever could. They sat by the river until the sun climbed high, saying little but sharing everything in the comfortable silence. Days passed. Daniel built a small cabin on the edge of the plains, near the cottonwoods where the river curved like a silver ribbon through the land. Ayanna gathered herbs and taught him the names of stars, of birds, of the wind. He taught her how to mend fences and ride faster than the storm winds. Sometimes at night she would wake from dreams filled with fur,